Okay, everybody, welcome to part one of this discussion on early Israeli terrorism. We're going to be looking at a list of early terrorist activities that occurred uh, around the time of the formation of the State of Israel. It's what they used to help facilitate their independence. The Brits had initially laid the foundation, right? By establishing a presence there to keep the Arab population in check while more and more Jews were flooding in. And ultimately, once they overawed the Arab population, their attitude was, okay, Brits, get the hell out. We don't need you. And the Brits weren't doing that. There was still the Palestinian mandate that was in place. They didn't like that. So they started literally engaging in terrorist activities. And what we're going to be looking at is something that was documented by the UN, interestingly enough. And let me tell you what's going on with that. Something very similar to what's going on right now. You have all this bombing that's been taking place for the past, almost a month now, right? Over 3 weeks. Israel making incursions into Gaza, right? Bombing people into oblivion, families, so they can move in and steal their land. This is what they've been doing since 1940, well, even before that, but, especially since the establishment of the State of Israel. Constantly, if not blowing up homes, bulldozing them, whatever, right? Slowly but surely, stealing more and more and more of their land. Anyway, so for the past almost a month now, Israel has been at it again, supposedly in retaliation for, the Hamas attack, which of course was orchestrated by the Israeli government. But now, finally, I think as of yesterday, the UN has now stated that they would like a ceasefire. Notice, no demands, no troops, right? If this was another country, uh, there would have been ground troops a long time ago, right? International outcry. No, they sat back on their ass for nearly a month, just twiddling their thumbs, knowing full well what the hell was going on there, right? Now that Israel has made major incursions and created tremendous chaos and destroyed countless thousands of homes and apartment buildings, hospitals, right? The infrastructure has been pretty much dismantled, right? Now the UN steps in. That alone is a big frickin' joke, right? Where the hell were they almost a month ago? Naturally, toothless tiger. But here's another thing, and this is something that the masses still have not figured out. A lot of people now are cheering on the UN. Oh, our savior, finally! I wish they intervened sooner, but nevertheless, the UN now. Well, first of all, again, it's a toothless tiger. They're not doing anything, right? They're just verbalizing, making a suggestion that there be a peace treaty, or a truce, well, knock it off. But ultimately, the real aim here is to get people now to think that, yeah, the UN is our hero. We got to strengthen the UN. We got to support the UN so it can stop Israel in the future and any other nation like this that engages in open tyranny against civilian population. This is exactly what Israel wants you to do. The UN is Israel's little bitch, right? Jews created the UN. It's always worked for them. It's always been their catalyst for world government. They're the ones that created the League of Nations before that, right? That was supposed to be the catalyst for world government. Didn't play out. The thing went belly up. So they created this friggin' jokester enterprise. God damn it. There's people, even in the Arab world, right, who are supposed to be largely Jew-wise, and they fall. A good many of them do. They fall for the UN's rhetoric. It's goddamn mind-blowing. But anyway, so just like the UN is not your hero now, even though it's trying to make itself out to look that way. And a lot of people are falling for it, right? Oh, yes, we got to get the UN to stop Israel from bombing Palestine. Oh, knock it off. Well, the same was going on here. This list that we're going to look at, though true, though important, right, says nothing in favor of the UN. The UN, rightly so, did point out all of these Israeli terrorist attacks that were going on in the latter part of the 40s, leading up to the creation of the State of Israel, and even following a little thereafter. The UN was right in pointing this out. But don't think for 1 minute that this means the UN is your buddy. The UN was totally in league with what was going on with all these terrorist bombings. Again, it's just like Winston Churchill pointing out, and everything he said was true, right? In that London Sunday Herald article, 1921, everything he said was true. There is a conspiracy for world government. It's international Jewry behind it. They created the Bolshevik Revolution, blah, 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 blah. But he was a piece of crap. He was the biggest whore of all, right? The same with the UN. Even though this report on Israeli terrorism is important, and it is true, consider the source and realize that though the information is good, it says nothing in favor of the UN. Although I have to say this, there have been many Security Council members over the years who genuinely were opposed to Israel. They like that. That's good PR for their little UN enterprise, right? To convince people that, it's a good thing. Because look at all these sincere people that have complained about Israel over the years. No, it says nothing in favor of the UN, right? There's been some decent FBI agents over the years, even a few decent CIA operatives, if you can believe that. There was one CIA director, William Colby, who was decent, right? They'll let a few slip through the cracks here and there for that reason, just for good PR. But the enterprise itself, it's a piece of raging horse crap. Anyway, with that said, on October 1st, 1948, a UN committee had produced a report on Zionist terrorism for Ralph Bunchy, the UN commissioner to Palestine at the time. It had contained a list of a total of 259. I think I said previously over 260. I got the number wrong. It was, 259 entries in a timeline regarding terrorist attacks that began in November of 1944, leading up to the creation of the State of Israel, right? Wanting the Brits to get out of there early on. And it continued up until September of 1948, around the time of the creation of the State of Israel. This was all designed, again, to get the Brits out, and a few Americans too, but mostly the Brits, right? To get them the hell out so that now they could have their little independent state. Thanks for letting us use you, sucker you, take advantage of you. But now that we got what we wanted out of you, get the hell out. This is our land now. We're claiming it. We stole it thousands of years ago, or 2,500 years ago, by using mercenaries to oust the population, burn down their homes, whatever. And now we're doing the same thing again. We're stealing it by fiat. We're done using you now. Hit the road. Thanks, boys. And say thanks to everyone over in England for allowing us to suck their tax money out of their pockets to fund this operation for you to secure this land for us. Now get the hell out, and if you don't, we'll bomb more of you. Anyway, this report was compiled from a series of reports from the U.S. State Department, the British Foreign Office, and various American and British press services. So the UN compiled this report from all of those sources. It was opened up, the report, with this introductory statement. It said, In view of the tragic assassination of Count Folk Bernadotte by identified Jewish terrorists on September 17th of this year, the following report has been prepared for the use of Dr. Bunchy, Count Bernadotte's immediate replacement. And then it went on to say, this report is a compilation of all identified terrorist attacks on British, American, and Arab individuals and entities in the assassination of British resident minister in the Middle East on November 6, 1944, by members of the terrorist Jewish Stern Gang. The Stern Gang, also Ergen, too, as we'll see, multiple terrorist groups, ranging from that to the assassination of Count Bernadotte on September 17th of 1948 by members of this same gang of fanatics. So they refer to them here in this UN report as fanatics and terrorists. They rightly call them Jewish. Wow. So I would have to say that the author of this report, the compiler, does seem to me to have been sincere, genuinely opposed to these terrorist activities. But again, that's no feather in the cap for the UN. It's a feather in the cap for the person that compiled this and wrote this down. Like I said, there have been people in the UN over the years who really have been opposed to Israel, right? But nothing happens because at the highest levels, again, the UN is completely controlled. It's a fraud. Just like there's been a few people in the FBI, a few people in the CIA who have been true Americans and have, been whistleblowers. But that doesn't save the agencies they work for. It doesn't say anything good about them. So I have to stress that again here with this report, or its compiler anyway. He genuinely was opposed to these terrorist activities, but says nothing in favor of the UN. Anyway, so what follows now is a breakdown of the timeline of Zionist terror in this report. The first incident, recorded in November of 1944, had occurred in Cairo. Most of these occurred right there in Palestine, what was to become Israel. But they had occurred in other places as well. At this time, Lord Moyne, British resident minister in the Middle East at the time, and his driver were both assassinated outside of the minister's Cairo residence. Two murderers were involved, we're told. One was injured, and both were immediately arrested. They were Jews. They were working on behalf of, the Zionist cabal, targeting these two individuals. And the main reason was the Brits were not complying. They weren't getting out. They were basically telling them, we don't need you anymore now. We have the Arab population in Palestine overawed with Jews. We can manage things now. And the Brits were like, no, what the hell are you talking about? So, yeah, assassinations, bombings, just terrorism across the board. Like I said, 259 incidents. Can you imagine, guys? To this day, when you mention the word terrorism, most people think, well, the Muslims. I'm not exonerating Islam, right? They have their share of genuine terrorists. But guys, most of the time, they have been on the payroll of either the CIA or the Mossad, working in tandem with them. Very few of them operate literally on their own, right? But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. When you look at these examples of terrorism, 259 of them within just a 4-year period, right? You got to ask, will the real terrorists please stand up? Who are the real terrorists here? Don't forget, Menachem Begin, I am behind all the terrorism in all the world. They really are. They really are. But few are aware of that, and few will even listen to you when you try to tell them that. But that is a fact. Israel, baby. They're the real terrorists. The next in our timeline here is January 10th, 1945, also in Cairo. The British Supreme Military Court on that day had put on trial Elihu Bet Sors from Tel Aviv and Elihu Hakin of Haifa. Both had admitted to being members of the Jewish terrorist Stern Gang. So I guess they had caught them in the act of terrorism, but caught them before they had actually engaged in it. January 18th, 1945 is the next date in this timeline, and this also took place in Cairo. On this date, the British Supreme Military Court had sentenced these two murderers of Lord Moyne to death. Both killers at this time admitted that their act was done in partnership with the Stern Gang, the terrorist gang, which they said had ordered the killings not only to pressure the Brits to leave Palestine, but also it was to serve as a warning to the Brits not to interfere with future Jewish immigration to Jerusalem. They were trying to stop it. It was angering the local Arab population, and they were afraid of, backlashes and the instability of the region, right? And so, talk about instability. Here were these Jewish terrorists assassinating them so that they wouldn't stop more Jewish migration. You see how these bastards work, guys? Even when you're their minion and lick their hindparts and do what they want, they'll still come after you the minute you say, hey, wait a minute, I was for this at the beginning, but now I'm seeing it's causing a lot of problems. Oh, no, they'll blow you away. And amazingly, all through the centuries, all through the millennia, they've gotten away with it. The next entry on this list was March 22nd, 1945. Each one of these entries isn't necessarily a terrorist attack. It's just, a timeline of what was going on with the terrorist attacks. But there literally were 259 actual terrorist attacks. I don't think I recorded all of them in this set of notes, just the main highlights, but there were 259 total. Anyway, this next entry, March 22nd, 1945, also in Cairo, the entry stated that the two convicted Jewish Stern Gang terrorists just mentioned, who, again, murdered Lord Moyne and his driver, finally met their end. They were hung on this date in the Cairo prison, and this was announced by British authorities. So they met their suitable fate. Moving on to 1946, this next entry is dated January 12th, and this occurred in Palestine. On this date, a train was derailed by Jewish terrorists at Hadera, near Haifa, by a bomb that had gone off, and then later they robbed the train and made off with 35,000 pounds in cash. 2 British police officers were injured at the time. The next incident recorded is dated January 18th, 6 days later, 1946. This one was in Haifa. Over 900 illegal Jewish immigrants were captured off Haifa by the British Royal Navy. So you can see what was going on here, right? Illegal immigration of Jews. The British government was trying to stop this. Again, they saw it as a very destabilizing factor. It was going to create a lot of problems with the Arabs. They were trying to minimize this. And no, the Jews were saying, you're going to let us continue to flood this area. And if you don't, we're going to assassinate you and or bomb you, or shoot you or bomb you. The next entry, January 19th, 1946. This one was in Jerusalem. Jewish terrorists there destroyed a power station and a portion of the central Jerusalem prison by explosives. 2 persons were killed by the police, we're told, in the fracas. The next entry is January 20th, 1946, also in Palestine once again. Jewish terrorists launched an attack against the British-controlled Givat Olga Coast Guard station located between Tel Aviv and Haifa. Clearly, the Coast Guard was monitoring migration of Jews, on boats, right? So they were terrorizing them so they would not continue to do this. Frickin' unreal. 10 persons were injured in this attack, and 1 was killed. Captured papers indicated that the purpose of this particular raid was to take revenge on the British for their seizure of the refugee ship. Yeah, there you go. On January 18th. British military authorities in Jerusalem questioned 3,000 Jews and held 148 in custody. So just look at this, guys. One, attack after another, after another, after another. And, essentially they got away with it. Oh, yeah, a few people here and there were captured, but the state of Israel still marched forward. It got recognized. It wasn't labeled a terrorist state, even though everybody involved in the creation of the damn thing was, in fact, a terrorist, right? They were violating law after law after law, smuggling in all of the... It's unreal. It's unreal. No other nation has ever been able, could ever be able to get away with half the stuff that these SOBs have pulled. The next entry is April 25th, 1946, again in Palestine. Jewish terrorists had attacked a British military installation near Tel Aviv at this time. This group, which contained a number of young girls, interestingly enough, had as its goal the capture of British weapons. British authorities rounded up 1,200 suspects. Girls. I guess they figured, nobody will suspect them, or they won't be harsh on them. Maybe they'll be able to get away with it. No scruples with these SOBs. No limits, guys. You can't put anything past them. They're the most sleazy, manipulative. There aren't even words adequate enough to describe just how low life they are, right? You can't put anything past them. They have no bounds. No bounds. June 24th, 1946, the next entry, also in Palestine. The Irgun radio Fighting Zion warned that 3 kidnapped British officers were held as hostages for 2 Irgun members, Joseph Sincon and Isaac Ashbel, facing execution, as well as 31 Irgun members facing trial. So as time went on, their crimes got even more serious, and even more people were becoming involved in them. The next item on the list, not an attack, but an attempt at justice here. This entry was June 27th of 1946 in Palestine. At this time, 30 Irgun members were sentenced by a British military court to 15 years in prison for previous terrorist incidents. June 29th of 46, also in Palestine, is the next entry. British military units and police had raided Jewish settlements throughout Palestine, searching for the leaders of Haganah, another leading Jewish terrorist agency. Boy, these were the days, huh? When Jews, like anyone else who committed crimes, were hunted down and arrested. What happened there? Now, you're an anti-Semite. You go after any of these terrorist bastards, right? And that's what would happen. Nobody goes after them, in fact, right? The IDF, nobody questions them. Well, they might question them, but nobody's doing anything about it, right? There are complaints being made. They are being called the terrorists that they are, right? The ethnic cleansers that they are. Nobody's doing a damn thing, though. Anyway, the Jewish Agency for Palestine was occupied, and 4 top officials were arrested at this time. At the end of June 1946, 2,000 were arrested, and 4 Jews and 1 British soldier were killed. 2,000. Look how many were involved in these terrorist acts, right? And like I said, as we go along in this list, we're going to see even greater numbers. There were a huge number of Jews that were recruited into these terrorist acts. This sounds like what was going on in the 1st century, right? With the insurrectionist movement against the Romans. The next entry here is July 1st of 1946, also in Palestine. British officials announced the discovery of a large arms dump that were hidden underground at Meshek Yagur. 2,659 men and 59 women were detained for the 3-day operation, in which 27 settlements were searched. In the end, 4 were killed and 80 were injured. July 3rd, 1946, again in Palestine. Palestine High Commissioner Lieutenant General Sir Alan Cunningham had commuted to life imprisonment the death sentences of Joseph Sincon and Isaac Ashbeck, Irgun members. Look how relentless they were, right? And how interesting that the state of Israel, which this was all done in preparation for, still marched forward, right? No one should have recognized that illegitimate state, just on this basis alone. Forget that they stole the land. It wasn't theirs to begin with. But to set the stage for it through terrorist acts, right? The next item on the list is July 4th, 1946. Again, this one was in Tel Aviv. British officers, Captains K. Spencer, C. Warburton, and A. Taylor, who had been kidnapped by the Irgun on June 18th and held as hostages for the lives of Sinkon and Ashbel, which I just mentioned a moment ago, were released in Tel Aviv unharmed. Look at that. Look at that. At this time, Irgun issued a declaration of war against the British, claiming that they had no alternative but to fight. Declaration of war. Gee, what happened to we don't bargain with terrorists, right? They caved. They caved. Cart pulling the horse, you could say. July 22nd, 1946, in Jerusalem, the West Wing of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, which housed British military headquarters and other governmental offices, was destroyed at 12:57 p.m. that day by explosives planted in the cellar by members of the Irgun terrorist gang. This was probably the most famous of all the attacks, King David Hotel. By the 26th of July, the casualties were 76 persons killed, 46 injured, and 29 still missing in the rubble. The dead included many British, Arabs, and even some Jews, right? July 23rd, 1946, in Jerusalem, the Irgun Zvi Lumi terrorist group, there were quite a few of them, had taken responsibility for the King David bombing, but blamed the British for it, calling them tyrants. Oh, how Jewish of them. Our terrorist activities are your fault. You're the tyrants. They're still pulling this. They always have. And they're still getting away with it. How much longer, Goyim? How much longer, Gentiles, are we going to put up with their shenanigans? July 24th, 1946, in London this time, the British government released a white paper that accused the Haganah, Irgun, and Stern gang of a planned movement of sabotage and violence, you think? Under the direction of the Jewish Agency, and asserted that the June 29th arrest of Zionist leaders was the cause of the bombing. Well, yeah, of course. So there wasn't a terrorist attack in Britain, but in London, but this edict was issued. July 28th of 46 in Jerusalem, the British Palestine commander, Lieutenant General Sir Evelyn Barker, banned fraternization by British troops with Palestine Jews, whom he stated, quote, cannot be absolved of responsibility for terroristic acts. Absolutely. The order stated that this would punish, quote, the race by striking at their pockets and showing our contempt for them. You only wish our leaders today, here in Britain and abroad, had contempt for them, as they should, right? If they were real human beings, actually concerned about the country that they're supposed to be serving, not Israel, there'd be a lot of contempt for these monstrosity little bastards, right? These mass murdering frickin' psychopaths from hell. July 29th, 1946, in Tel Aviv, police there had raided a workshop that they found was producing bombs for these various terrorist groups. July 30th, 1946, in Tel Aviv. The next day, Tel Aviv was placed under 22-hour-a-day curfew as 20,000 British troops began a house-to-house sweep for terrorists. The city was sealed off from the rest of Jerusalem, and troops were ordered to shoot to kill any curfew violators. Wow. Again, these were the good old days, weren't they? July 31st, 1946, in Tel Aviv, a large cache of weapons, extensive counterfeiting equipment, and $1 million in counterfeit government bonds were discovered in Tel Aviv's largest synagogue of all places. Look at that. Just like the temple in Jerusalem in ancient times was the banking house where they kept all their illegitimate, ill-gotten gold that they stole from every country they ever cursed their presence with, right? Here we see they were hiding all of their fake cash, fake bonds in a synagogue. Yeah. The rabbis were all for this kind of activity. Of course. It's them calling the shots every time, guys. They're the worst of the worst. July 31st, 1946, in Haifa. 2 ships arrived at Haifa with a total of 3,200 illegal Jewish immigrants. Look at this. And this was long after the little deal with Hitler, the Havara agreement, right? Or the transfer agreement, as it's also called. Still, they were smuggling in thousands and thousands of Jews to overawe the Arab presence. They wanted more Jews now than ever, not just to overawe the Arab presence. They pretty much already had done that. They needed more to fight against the Brits. August 2nd, 1946, in Tel Aviv, British military authorities ended the curfew in Tel Aviv after detaining 500 persons for further questioning. A second arms dump was discovered on July 1st in a school building. Yeah. If not in a church, in a school building. How Jewish of them. August 2nd, 1946, in Jerusalem, the Palestinian government disclosed that 91 persons were killed and 45 injured in the King David Hotel bombing. 91 killed and 45 injured. August 2nd of 1946, in Jerusalem, Jerusalem police announced the arrest of Itzhak Yetsimsky, second man in the Stern gang, second highest in command. August 12th of 1946, in London, the British government had announced that it would allow no more unscheduled immigration into Palestine, and that those seeking entry into that country would be sent to Cyprus and other areas under detention. So the Brits were on to them. They not only didn't want mass migration of Jews anymore because it was creating more tension with the Arabs, but they knew that what was really happening with all this is it was providing more manpower to fight against them, to bounce them out. Declaring that such immigration threatened a civil war with the Arab population, it charged a minority of Zionist extremists with the attempt to force an unacceptable solution to the Palestinian problem. Notice how they said, a small minority of Zionist extremists. Oh, come on now. They were virtually all in on this. August 12th, 1946, in Haifa, two ships carrying a total of 1,300 Jews, Jewish refugees, had arrived at Haifa. The port area was isolated on August 11th by British military and naval units. The first deportation ship sailed for Cyprus with 500 Jews on board. How much you want to bet within days they were on their way back there again? August 13th, 1946, again in Haifa. 3 Jews were killed and 7 wounded when British troops were compelled to fire on a crowd of about 1,000 persons trying to break into the port area of Haifa. 2 Royal Navy ships with 1,300 illegal Jewish immigrants on board had sailed for Cyprus on this day. 1,300. Another ship with 600 illegal immigrants was captured and confined in the Haifa harbor. So that's 1,900, almost 2,000, just in that one day that they had captured, right? August 26th, 1946, in Palestine, British military units searched the coastal villages of Qasera and Sadoth Yam for 3 Jews who had bombed the transport Empire Rival the previous week. 85 persons, including the entire male population of one of the villages, were sent to the Rafah detention center. The Brits weren't messing around. But look who went out in the end, right? August 27th, 1946, in Palestine. During the searches conducted on August 26th, an explosive impact mine, similar to the one used on the Empire Rival, was discovered. August 29th, 1946, in Jerusalem, the British government announced the commutation to life imprisonment of the death sentences imposed on 18 Jewish youths convicted of bombing the Haifa railroad shops. It didn't matter how stringent, how forceful these measures were, right? It didn't by any means lessen their terrorist activities. In fact, it caused them to increase. This was the problem the Romans faced in the first century, right? The more crucifixions, they would have crosses lined up by the hundreds, and the bodies were left on the crosses for days as a public display, right, of their intolerance of insurrectionism. It didn't even slightly diminish the problem. It escalated it. No matter how many, they finally had to march in, right, in 70 AD. I'll be talking about that pretty soon here. Well, on my other channel. I'm going to be talking about that and a couple more uprisings in the following decades. Even that didn't teach them a lesson. The city was decimated at that time. The temple was completely destroyed. The whole, temple leadership was disbanded, right? And yet the bastards didn't stop. It did slow them down, though, because they were severely decimated. Didn't stop them, though. Didn't stop them. They were the terrorists of the day, right? The insurrectionists. Same thing here. Same exact thing. Nearly 2,000 years later. Anyway, August 30th, 1946, in Palestine, British military units had discovered arms and munitions dumps in the Jewish farming villages of Dorot and Ruhama. September 8th of 46 in Palestine. Zionist terrorists cut the Palestine Railroad in 50 places. September 9th of 1946 in Tel Aviv, 2 British officers were killed in an explosion in a public building. September 9th of 46 in Haifa, an Arab constable was killed. September 10th of 46 in Palestine. British troops imposed a curfew and arrested 101 Jews and wounded 2 in a search for saboteurs in Tel Aviv, as well as neighboring Ramat Gan. The Irgun terrorist group took action against the railways on September 8th as a protest. Non-stop terrorism. Sorry, some of this might sound, just endlessly redundant, but it's necessary to go through all of this. This is going to be a lengthy series here. I'm looking at probably at least 6 parts, and it's going to be just one listing after another of crimes like this. It's necessary, though, just to document how extensive these terrorist acts were. Look how relentless they were. They would not stop. It didn't matter how many were captured, how many were killed. Again, the parallels with first century insurrectionism against Rome is striking. You can't miss it. September 14th, 1946, in Jaffa, Jewish terrorists robbed 3 banks in Jaffa and in Tel Aviv, killing 3 Arabs. 36 Jews were arrested. September 15th, 1946, in Tel Aviv, Jewish terrorists attacked a police station on the coast near Tel Aviv, but were driven off by gunfire. October 2nd, 1946, again in Tel Aviv, British military units and police had seized 50 Jews in a Tel Aviv cafe after a Jewish home was blown up. This home had belonged to a Jewish woman who had refused to pay extortion money to the Irgun terrorist gang. Imagine that? Can you imagine that? This sounds exactly like what went on just prior to the American Revolution, right? Where Sam Adams's terrorist group was going out and, tarring and feathering people, burning houses down, just because they weren't going along with the idea of a revolution, right? They weren't opposed to the king. They had no problem. They just wanted, to go on in peace. No, they wanted to incite a revolution, to create the illusion that there was a need for it. And they did it through terrorism. The same thing here. In this case, they wanted money, extortion money from this woman, right? They probably did this multitudes of times with multitudes of people. Only a few cases ever got documented, right? This is how Irgun probably got a lot of its funding. They didn't have the U.S. yet to suck dry, right? That arrangement came later. Well, I mean, they were sucking us dry in other ways through the Federal Reserve, but you know what I mean. They didn't have billions of dollars being sent over to Israel that they'd never have to pay back, right? That wasn't in place yet, of course. October 6th of 1944 in Jerusalem, an RAF man was killed by gunfire. October 8th, 1946 in Jerusalem, 2 British soldiers were killed when their truck detonated a landmine outside of Jerusalem, placed there obviously deliberately for that purpose. A leading Arab figure was wounded in a similar mine explosion in Jerusalem and more road mines were found near government house at this time. So, they had planned to take out a lot more personnel with these mines. They had planted them, extensively. October 31st of 46, in Rome, the British embassy there was damaged by a bomb, which was believed to have been planted by Jewish terrorists, of course, naturally. November 3rd of 46, in Palestine, 2 Jews and 2 Arabs were killed in clashes between Arabs and a group of Jews that were attempting to establish a settlement at Lake Hula in northern Palestine. November 4th, 1946, back in Rome, Italian authorities released a letter in which the Jewish terrorist gang Ergen took credit for the October 31st embassy bombing that we just referred to a moment ago. November 5th of 46, in Palestine, British authorities released the following 8 Jewish agency leaders from the Latrun concentration camp, where they had been held since June 29th. The names were Moshe Chertok, Dr. Isaac Greenbaum, Dr. Bernard Joseph, David Remes. I don't have to read this whole list. You got the point. These were big names, right? These weren't just street people here. Doctor this, and these were prominent people that were involved in this. Just like with the insurrectionist movement of the first century, right? There were even temple leaders. Most of the temple leadership was against, insurrectionism, but there were some, particularly among the Pharisees, that were secretly supporting the whole thing. And you can bet they were secreted out later, before the Romans come in and sacked the temple and, wiped out the whole priestly system. The ones that, had supported the insurrectionist movement, probably like Josephus, right? Because he was a Pharisee, don't forget. Although he wasn't working in the temple at the time. He had, quote, defected. He only defected so he could go back to Rome and infiltrate it. But you can bet some of those Pharisees that were supporting the insurrectionists were probably told ahead of time, hey, look, to get out of getting killed by the Romans, all you got to do is just, tell them you're defecting, you're going to support them, and come back to Rome, we'll meet you there, and we can take over Rome from within. Oh, yeah, all kinds of shenanigans like that were going on. Anyway, a total of 2,550 Haganah suspects had also been released at this time, as well as 779 Jews had been arrested in the wake of the King David bombing. On November 7th of 46, in Palestine, railroad traffic was suspended for 24 hours all throughout Palestine, following a 4th Irgun attack on railway facilities in a period of 2 days. November 9th through November 13th of 46, in Palestine, 19 persons, 11 British soldiers and policemen, and 8 Arab constables were killed there in Palestine during this period as Jewish terrorists, using landmines and suitcase bombs, had increased their attacks on the railroad station trains, and even streetcars. November 14th, 1946, in London, the Board of Deputies of British Jews condemned Jewish terrorist groups who threatened to export terrorism to England. Yeah, they were condemning it only because they were in England, right? They didn't want to be targeted because they knew they were targeting, uh, Jews as well. Or, I mean, maybe not on purpose. Some were on purpose, like that woman, right? That wouldn't be let herself be extorted by Ergen. But some Jews just got caught up in the fracas. They weren't necessarily being targeted. So that's why they were protesting in London, the Jews in London. Anyway, November 18th, 1946, in Tel Aviv, police there attacked Jews, um, assaulting many and firing into houses. 20 Jews were injured in fights with British troops following this death on November 17th, following the death on November 17th of a policeman and an RAF sergeant, and a landmine explosion. 5 persons were injured when a bomb exploded in the Jerusalem tax office on this same day. Later on, December 2nd, that was quite a hiatus, at least as far as what's in the UN record here. It went from November 18th to December 2nd. I'm sure there were other things that, for whatever reason, didn't make it on the record. They never let that long of a time go by. Anyway, December 2nd through December 5th of 46 in Palestine, 10 persons, including 6 British soldiers, were killed in bomb and landmine explosions. December 3rd of 46 in Jerusalem, a member of the Stern gang was killed in an aborted holdup attempt. December 26th of 46, again in Palestine, armed Jewish terrorists had raided 2 diamond factories, jewelry factories, in Netanya and Tel Aviv, and escaped with nearly $107,000 in diamonds, cash, and bonds. So there you go. This was all to fund more, future attacks, right? The purchase of more bombs and more, military equipment. These raids had signaled an end to a 2-week truce during the World Zionist Congress. Imagine that. Wow. A truce just so we can have our Zionist Congress to pump us up with more enthusiasm. Then we'll get back into the bombing and, shooting. And what the hell, man? Anyway, moving on now to the next year, 1947. Starting right away on January 1st in Jerusalem, Dov Gruner was sentenced to hanging by a British military court for taking part in a raid on the Ramat Gan police headquarters in April of 1946, earlier on. January 2nd of 47, in Palestine, a wave of terror swept Palestine as Jewish terrorists had staged bombings and machine gun attacks in 5 cities. Casualties wound up being rather low. They were apprehended, I guess, before too long. Homemade flamethrowers were used in several of these instances. Pamphlets seized had warned that the Irgun had again declared war against the British and the Arabs of Palestine. Declared war. Amazing, guys. Amazing. How the Brits didn't go in there and just en masse. Just, I don't know. I don't know. Well, I guess there were several raids, right, where they made a lot of arrests, but look how relentless this was. They should have been far, far more aggressive than what they were. January 4th, 1947, in Jerusalem, British soldiers had been ordered to wear sidearms at all times and were forbidden to enter any cafe or restaurant. That's how many, bombings there had been, right? January 5th, 1947, over in Egypt, 11 British troops were injured in a hand grenade attack on a train carrying troops to Palestine. The attack took place near Bena, 25 miles from Cairo. January 8th of 47 in Palestine, British police arrested 32 persons that were suspected of being members of the Irgun terrorist gang's Black Squad in raids on Rishon El Zion and Rehoboth. Rehoboth is the name of a town right outside of Boston. I'll do a video sometime on Zio place names in the U.S. They're all over the damn place. January 12th, 1947, in Haifa, a single terrorist had driven a truck filled with high explosives into the central police station and exploded it, killing 2 British policemen and 2 Arab constables, and also injuring 140 others. The terrorist himself escaped. This this action ended a 10-day lull in the violence of the Stern Gang. They later took credit for this. January 13th, 1947, in Haifa, British soldiers and police had screened 872 persons in Haifa and detained another 100 for further questioning, as Arabs and Jews both condemned this previous mentioned bombing. January 14th of 47 in Jerusalem, Yehuda Katz was sentenced to life in prison by a Jerusalem court for robbing a bank in Jaffa in September of 46 to obtain funds for the terrorists. Yep. Murderers, thieves, liars, scam artists. Hey, let's give credit where it's due. They're the best at it, aren't they? The most proficient, and have, the biggest notches in their belt when it comes to things like this, all through the centuries. Anyway, guys, I see we've already passed the hour mark. Lots more to come on this. Again, sorry for the redundancy of it, just going through this long list here, but it is necessary to see just how unbelievably evil these bastards are, how relentless they are. They're masters of death, folks, masters of misery, coercion, blackmail, just lies, propaganda. It doesn't matter what period of history we look back on, continuing right up into today, they've always done this. This is always how they've operated. They have no scruples, no conscience, no humanity whatsoever. Never have, still don't, never will. All right, guys, that concludes this discussion. Lots more to come in the next video. We'll catch you then. Take care.